You're listening to Bold Calling, an award-winning podcast presented by Orum, where every episode we bring on the biggest and brightest minds in the tech and sales industries for a discussion about their biggest challenges and the unique ways they're working to solve them. Today, I am joined by Daisy Chung, who is the head of revenue strategy here at Orum, and Ernest Owusu, who is the head of sales development transformation at 6 Sense. Daisy, Ernest, both of you, thank you guys so much for joining me today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you for having us.
So this is going to be a continuation of our third season of the podcast, where I'm bringing on two industry experts and we're going to talk about one specific thing that they are both very, very good at knowing. And so we're going to talk a lot about context and calls. And the first thing I want to dive right in, this is going to be a high-level question to start us off. It may sound a little silly, but for people who aren't familiar, I know it's simple, and we'll start with you, Ernest. Does having context before a rep makes a call actually matter?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll say it definitely helps, right? And Daisy is definitely the champion of this and probably can attest to the fact that you can be very successful without the context. But, from my perspective on the hundreds of thousands of calls I listened to throughout the course of my career, having that context does allow you to break down barriers and be a lot more personalized and engage your prospect in a different way. Now, the level of context you have and the specificity, that's kind of where you have to be careful about managing your time, things along those lines. But it does matter. I definitely think it does matter, but you can definitely be a phenomenal cold caller, phenomenal caller without it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Daisy, what do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's all about the opportunity cost of how much time you're putting into the context. And it's also about how exciting you make that context. I think general context, like most sales folks know, like, hey, when someone gets a new job, when they went to a certain college, or when they're in a certain city, like that's kind of the very normal things to talk about. And you can say, oh, hey, Ernie, I noticed you're in San Francisco. That's awesome. Go Warriors. Or you can say, hey, Ernie, like, I noticed you've been in San Francisco for 10 years. That's awesome. Like, you must have seen all the tech wave come in and out. And I see you've been in tech for so long. I'm reaching out because X, Y, Z. So the difference in taking that specific context, it took me the same amount of time to research, probably a couple of seconds to know Ernie's in San Francisco, but how I use that context to make it sound generic or make it sound a little more exciting, tie back to his job, there's a big difference there.
Yeah, there's so much. There are so many people who do the like, hey, Adam, saw you went to John Carroll, and then they have nothing else. I'm like, I did. I can't imagine that has anything to do with whatever you want to ask me on this cold call, but like, yes, I did. I went to John Carroll. Congratulations, you went on my LinkedIn page. Yeah. I want to ask, Ernest, for people who I'm saying might not be aware of 6 Sense, which to me feels insane because of how, in my mind, how omnipresent you guys are and all the incredible stuff you do. But like, there are different intent stages when you are working a prospect. And just for people who are unfamiliar, can you sort of walk through those and just kind of give people maybe an idea of what they mean and why they're so important? And then we'll kind of get into some nuance of them.
Yeah, definitely. So the biggest context around what this applies to with making calls and 10 stages is there's essentially 4 stages that we call purchase, decision, consideration, awareness. And when companies are in purchase and decision, that's when we are predicting that they are much more likely to open opportunities, want to talk to us, and eventually turn into revenue. So a lot of our focus on is if we have these stages where there's a higher likelihood of opportunity creation, revenue creation, we want to make sure that we're calling at those points in time. So again, there are a lot of different signals and intent you can focus on to try and get a sense of what that could look like. But for our main focus on is if we have these stages, we know that we have a higher chance of success. Any tactic you're deploying, but specifically through the phone, you will have a lot more success because the company is actually a lot more engaged and ready to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, and I'm gonna a little bit later. I've got some questions I kind of ask about how you guys approach when and how to call and things like that. Daisy, for us here at Orum, obviously we believe in omni-channel, multi-channel, but it goes without saying we're huge believers in the phone. I want to ask you, and I didn't put this ahead of time, so I'm putting you on the spot, but I've put you on the spot in the past, and you're very good at this. So I apologize in advance, but I know you're going to crush it. For our team and for other SDRs out there who maybe don't have as much context and information before they pick up the phone, how can you kind of figure out what one of those stages a prospect might be in if you don't have a ton of data ahead of time when you are picking up the phone?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. A good thing about in our space, we're calling to a lot of sales professionals, sales leaders. it's all about tonality in my perspective. Like people in sales get cold calls all the time, cold emails, cold LinkedIn. To yield a response, you have to like rise above the noise. So how you even have that opening line, not exactly what you say, but how you say it makes an impact. Like just from like your hi, hello, whatever it is to engage that person. Once you have engaged, two things you can do. One, if you know you can get context really quickly, even a simple LinkedIn search, but you need a little more time, it's all about that buffer. So instead of jumping and go, hi, Adam, I want to book a meeting with you, and you're stumbling and trying to get that meeting, you go, hey, Adam, thanks for picking up today. I know it's the holidays. I appreciate the time. I know you're probably getting cold calls left and right. It's warm and fuzzy, but it's kind of getting you like, who's calling? I know it's the holidays. You're being nice about it. But for me, I'm actually buying me time as I'm looking up your LinkedIn real quick to get that quick context. So if you need that context, you engage, you thank them, you address like whatever's happening in that world. It's the holidays, Q4, it's, whatever the case is. And if you absolutely do not have context, then I think this is where you have to have the confidence to use your personality to shine. Like, hey, I know I kept you completely cold. I'm just reaching out, and then you get really excited about your product, your what you're talking about, and see if you can get some type of grasp. So there's two directions: grab context really quickly, or get really, really excited and like paint a picture, at least based on what their role is and how your product you think can help.
Yeah, so I think Daisy, you're spot on. I think one easy way, if you don't have that context and you just don't really know what you're going to say ahead of time, as long as you know your personas and what they do day in, day out, like what their job entails, what they're afraid of, what they're excited about, it's so much easier to build rapport, just talk about things that are relevant, right? So say, for example, if in your industry, there's a certain persona that is excited about a new launch that everyone is aware of, or something along those lines, like, hey, Ernest calling from Sixth Sense, and I saw this amazing news that happened recently about XYZ, whatever it might be. I'm calling because XYZ afterwards. But, so that's a way to kind of engage in the conversation, get an understanding of, or actually build rapport on the fact that something's happening within that persona that maybe you don't have the direct context of. And at least if you start the conversation with that, to Daisy's point, then you go to LinkedIn and find additional context to make the call over strong. But it is hard, obviously, to not have the context, but at least if you know your personas really well, and at least something that's relevant that's going on at the current state, you can use that to build rapport with them.
I just want to add in, I think the power of creating context, where people get stuck on like personalization and context, and it sounds like it's super customized, which it is to some degree, and it takes a lot of time. But you think of it kind of as like people mass email, mass LinkedIn, mass cold call, and the best people do in a way where it doesn't feel like that. You're mass creating context. Like to Ernie's point, you think of the one event that everybody in that industry is going to get excited for. It took me 5 minutes to Google that event. Every person I call, I might not even know your name, but I know you will be somewhat intrigued by this context. Same thing. You go to a conference. That's like the trigger. Hey, I saw this conference, and this speaker was talking about XYZ things. You just need one piece of context, and you mass do it, and that's mass customization, but only taking 5 minutes of your time.
We recently, with a bunch of our SDRs, I've been recording these objection handling videos, just like really quick clips of them talking about different objections. And one of the things one of them said is like, they said like, I love when somebody gives me an objection, like, it's not a good time, try me again in 4 months, because they say like, okay, well, just out of curiosity, so that I'm more prepared for that call in 4 months, like what's happening between now and then that is taking priority over the thing that I'm trying to talk to you about? And they basically told me, they're like, that's where I get my context. I want an objection so that I can ask them a question about that objection, so then they can give me the context. Because they're like, a lot of times that first 30 seconds, it's just winging a prayer. I'm like, boy, I hope they say something that I can use. And objections are like a huge opportunity to get that context. So yeah, I totally feel that.
I love that. That's like context inception. The prospect doing the work for you. They're doing the research.
Yeah. So I want to adjust to something that, Ernest, you might have a little bit more information on than Daisy and I do off the jump. So I want to start with you, and ask you, in your opinion, what data points and intent levers are driving the most impactful conversations with prospects?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there are a lot of signals out there, whether it's like, the intent data from someone on your website, from looking at keyword research, there's G2, trust radius, there's job changes. There are a lot of different kinds of intent that you can leverage. what I've always noticed is how you leverage that is far more important than anything. So like one approach that our team loves to take, and actually we pulled this from the guys at 30 Minutes of Presence Club from a webinar we did recently, but basically we do the tailored permission-based opener, right? So basically saying that like, hey, like I'm reaching out because I saw that you all are hiring for a certain role. And again, that hiring for certain roles is an intent lever you can focus on. That has booked a ton of meetings for us, right? The lost opportunities, the changes in jobs. If we see that a certain company has visited our website on their pricing, visit our pricing page on our website, not explicitly saying I saw you're on our pricing page, but just talking about differentiation between us and some of our competitors is a really easy way to spark the conversation. But I think for everyone out there, if you want to be specific on what we've done, the job changes, hiring for new roles, website activity tied to pricing pages. If you are tracking technology aligned to your competitors, especially if they are up for renewal, those are really good signals and intent that we focus on, and it gives you good context to capitalize and book a meeting with.
Daisy, what do you think?
Oh, 1,000,000% agreed. It's how you use the intent data that's the most important piece. And I think once you have that and such great information, putting together a process of leveraging it. And the beautiful thing is like, if any type of objection handle, like once you see results and you double, triple down, that's where the power comes from.
I love that. And, we're talking about like a moment ago, we're talking about personalization. Now we're talking about intent. And again, this may seem like high level stuff, but I don't know that it is. And I want to kind of get your guys' clarity. Daisy, what do you think the difference is between intent data and personalization? Because they are two different things.
Yes. I think intent data is what's given to you, and then personalization is what you do with it. So essentially, anyone can get intent data because there's such amazing tools out there, which, grateful we have that. But personalization, that's where everyone's going to differ. Like how, just like I shared in the beginning, how you say hello in two different ways is two different ways it can be received. Same thing, how you take that, oh, you just got a new job here, oh, you're hiring, and how you personalize with that, it's going to get you two different results.
Ernest, does that sound right to you? This is what you live and breathe every single day.
I would definitely agree. So it's the intent, the predictions, the triggers that a company is ready to buy from you. That's the underlying foundation to focus on. Aside from that, there are 1,000,001 different ways to personalize, right? So again, if I see that there's a certain company that is in market for our solutions, it could be lost opportunities. It could be someone's checking out my profile. It could be that they're on our website. There are so many different ways to personalize, or even John Carroll, for example, potentially, if they use it the right way. So there are different ways. There are different ways to personalize, but the underlying foundation is you will have higher success with higher intent and higher predictability. But yeah, they are different, but you kind of have to focus that effort of personalization where it's best fit, and that's typically where there's higher intent.
I didn't ask you guys this ahead of time, so again, I apologize, but my brain is going a million miles an hour, and I want to ask, like, as two people who have heard probably as many, if not more, calls than anyone out there listening today, how do you think the buyer feels like knowing that we as sellers have so much information now, like so much access to what they're doing, where they're at, not only like what pages they're on our website, but like what they're clicking on when they're on, that we have heat maps, we've got all of this stuff, and we can personalize it to such an extent. Do you think the buyer expects more now out of these conversations? Like, do you think they want you to come prepared? And if you are completely cold, they're like, Ernest, how do you not know any of this? Or has that shifted over the last couple of years?
I would say so. I think that if you think about how SDRs are prospecting right now, when I was an SDR, you could just batch and blast from a HubSpot template and use a random script that you found and it would work, right? But the reality is, like, our prospects are still getting a ton of calls like they did when I was SDR 10 years ago. But the quality of that outreach has increased, right? So if you are just factually getting more calls from the same amount of people over time, but they're a lot more personalized and a lot more relevant, and then you have that one-off call where someone just is like, hey, Adam, I'm Ernest from Sixth Sense. Let's talk about XYZ. It feels different. And as a result, it feels different. Their expectations are lower, and they're not as likely to have a conversation with you. So in short, like as a whole sales community and ecosystem, I think we are creating an environment, which is great, where our prospects do expect more from us. And if you are falling short by not having context or not personalizing the way you should be, then it's going to be a lot more challenging to book meetings.
Daisy, what do you think?
Yeah, 100% plus one. I mean, Adam, your exact example with the college is very telling as well. When your in-mail and your voicemail is crowded with so much reach outs, like only the strongest survive that you'll actually talk to. And so you have to stand out. You can't sound generic. And I think it's more important than ever to do that type of work.
Ernest, I'm just imagining. I can't possibly fathom how many calls you get that someone's like, "I saw you once played football." Like I'm just imagining. It's like every other call, someone else is like, "I saw a video of like your pro day," and you're like, "What do you want?"
Well, to Daisy's point though, I do get a lot of that, but there's a different aspect of how you communicate, your tonality that separates people, right? So it's like I know they did their research by the mere fact they talked about that, but some people are really good at weaving it into their conversation, weaving it into their products, showing emotion through it, and those separate from the others.
Yeah. Okay. Along these same lines, and Daisy, I want to start with you on this. Like, is there a tipping point though about how much pre-research you want to do before dialing? Like, the version of it that I think of is for a decade I've been interviewing people like you guys and different people, and I always prep a million questions. But if you prep too much, I'm constantly looking at the next question I want to get to, and then one of you might say something interesting, and I don't follow up on it. And that's not a good conversation. And I'm curious from a cold calling standpoint, is there like a analysis paralysis tipping point for pre-call research?
Absolutely. And that's why you have to find that like opportunity cost to time ratio. And that's why I've always believed, I think SDR is one of the best jobs in the world because it's not as pressurizing as like an AE's role or another role where there's a lot of, results demanded from it. There's a lot of results demanded from the SDR team. Don't get me wrong. But if you fumble a call because you didn't have the context, you can still call that person again. Maybe not immediate, but in a couple of months, in 6 months, in 9 months. You can keep going, and you keep calling multiple people. And that's where you learn and grow. And I think a lot of folks, when you get stuck in that building as much context and research as possible, oftentimes I've seen reps are not even sure what to say because they have so much information in front of them. And sometimes it's best to just get a little bit of context and just start calling and start having those conversations. And you'll naturally get better and you'll naturally learn to see what type of context you do. I also think it will vary based on how big that deal size is and what type of late stage or early stage call that is. So the bigger the deals, it does make sense to do a little more research. The smaller the deal, there's some deals that are so small, it doesn't make sense to do really any research except for maybe, a quick 1-minute search. And very similar, this is like the first time calling, trying to pitch the product and get them to take a demo. That doesn't require as much research as someone that is up for renewal, that you've gotten that intent data and it's a very strong high intent data. That's where it makes sense if you're towards the end of the funnel to get a really good meeting for your team to do a little more research too.
Ernest, do you guys have I'm sure you have some sort of data point or processy that they sort of determines like this is what we want to have available to us before we make those calls. I assume it's not just like vibes for each different rep.
No, I'd say the biggest thing that we focus on when it comes to like that, because again, to Daisy's point, there is a diminishing return with how much research you do. Now, what I've noticed is the types of lists you're building and the context you're using to build those lists is how you're able to combat that. So for us, when we're making calls, the majority of our broader team calls, like it's like in-market accounts, certain personas are hiring for certain roles. They have this kind of technology. They have this kind of competitive infrastructure, whatever it may be. So at least we have that ahead of time. It doesn't require a ton of research, but it's still towards the right accounts where we at least have some good context. Now, on the flip side, we do have scenarios where it's like very specific, like I saw that you liked this one page on LinkedIn. I saw that you recently changed jobs. You worked with this one person. I noticed that this one person's current customer gave a recommendation to you on your profile. Now, you do have to limit the volume of which the team does both of those approaches, but there's obviously an aspect of diminishing returns. You have to be very careful with how much you're asking the team to do that research ahead of time.
Is there a shift also with like how much experience the rep have? Like I always think about Colin, our SVP of revenue. Like I have watched him hop on a phone at like a company offsite and he just grabs someone else's list and just starts talking when someone picks up, and he books a meeting because he's just very good at it. And like I imagine like both of you could get on a call with someone you really have no information on and you have a wonderful conversation and have a positive outcome. Like, but then when you have a brand new rep, obviously you want them to know what they're doing, but it is also like if you give them so much stuff they're trying to memorize, like if you pick up the phone, it's like, hey, Ernest, I'm Adam, and oh my God, son of a so is there like, is it just like, do you think that perfect example, thank you, I'm very good at role playing.
You hang up on them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'll show you. You can't hang up on me. But I guess like, do you think it's the more experience a rep has, the less information they need ahead of time? Or, and Ernest, I'll start with you on this. I'm curious. I'm always curious people's thoughts.
So, I've always believed this. Daisy, I'm not sure if you agree with this, but I've always believed that calling is a skill. Like, there are some people who naturally have a very good threshold to start, where like they get on the phones without very much training, and they have a lower learning curve. It's a lot easier for them to produce results. But I don't really think as long as you're hiring for the right profile, the ability that people have, as long as you're hiring the right people who have the ability to understand the situation, quickly connect the dots, then you can be in a situation where it doesn't really matter if they're super experienced or just fresh out of college. So, and I've seen both, right? I've seen people that have, this is their second, third career who struggle on the phone. I've seen people who are literally after graduation crushing on the phone. As long as you hire for the right kind of intangible qualities and just know the fact that it's actually a skill that's required through time, you should be fine. But again, like there will be people like Daisy, myself, and others who have been doing this for years, because we've had so many calls and listened to so many calls, it just comes naturally to us. But anyone can get there, in my opinion.
I absolutely agree. I think I was just talking about this week. Actually, some of the best SDRs, AE, sales professionals I know came with no experience, and there are really good ones with a lot of experience too. I'm not discounting the experience, but I think in the world of sales and cold calling, it's really less about experience and more so about your personality. Like, do you have the grit? Do you kind of like have a chip on your shoulder? Do you want this so bad? Are you naturally just so curious and have a lot of questions and like you really care about something? Like all that comes really obvious. And I think the best sales team is not necessarily having a really strong leader. That's awesome, but someone who can hire really well. You hire someone really well, they do a really good job. Your leadership does impact it, but people are really good or really bad really because of their own merits in sales. And good leaders hire the best people they can, and they're more someone that helps them shuffle along versus them being the reason why the rep is like super duper duper good.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add to that too, so if anyone's thinking of like a very tangible way to assess this like natural ability to be good on the phone, there's a way to assess essentially clock speed through like mock calls, through trainings that you do through the interview process, where if you notice an individual who is very quick at taking context and applying it to your product, those people are usually very easy to train to become great callers, right? And that has nothing to do with your experience, your background, but I've noticed like time and time again, if I can say like, this blue cup is here, and why should someone with a blue cup buy 6 cents? They can just very quickly rattle off a reason for that. Those individuals can handle objections. They can, pass the conversation forward to get a meeting, and it's a lot easier for them as opposed to someone who maybe has been selling for 10 years.
One of our best SDRs 18 months ago, she was a teacher, and I don't think she had any prior sales experience, and now she just absolutely crushes on the phones. I love that. Okay, Ernest, I wanna ask you about. I'm leading the witness here because we have an Orum and 6 Cents playbook that I know is very good because I wrote it. But I want to ask you, at your breakthrough conference, your team did this really wonderful job of walking through the kind of connective tissue of 6 Cents intent data and Orum usage, and you can go like in as much detail as you feel comfortable, but you guys have this really awesome way of parsing out basically like how your SDRs are using AI to communicate with prospects, like via email versus when to call them. And I just think it's something that if people are using 6 Cents, they can absolutely take advantage of. But like in general, I just love how you guys are looking at it from a time management standpoint. So would you mind kind of giving our listeners some information on sort of how your team at 6 Cents is using like AI to focus on the emails, and then when you are using Orum to make those dials?
Yeah, so we're constantly innovating, so I'll tell you probably some updates since then. But I think the foundation around that is we have AI agents sending emails on behalf of the BDRs. So think of that as like if you have a rep who has an account and we want them to go after 6 or 10 contacts, right? The AI agent will identify a couple of above the line personas as well as primarily below the line and do outreach on behalf of the BDRs with hyper-personalized messaging. Now, when they're doing that, instead of us actually like putting their CEOs and cadence and writing emails for them, We'll let that campaign run in the background, and then we'll take that list of contacts and call them through blitzes with Orum, right? So that allows us to go wider, deeper into our accounts to make sure that we're getting all the touch we need with really good personalized outreach to our prospects. That's probably the first thing. And that approach specifically going off of this year, I think that's like 25% of all of our pipeline is generated from that motion. So having the ability to run some kind of agentic process where you run personalization at scale towards certain prospects based upon persona, by intent, by competitive takeouts, a lot of different plays you can run, takes all that off of the BDR's plates and make sure they can actually call in a more meaningful way as opposed to just batch and blasting on their own. So that's the first layer. The second layer, and I'm sure Daisy, you probably have seen this on your team as well, but one thing that we've been crushing with recently is very similar to how teams look at like cadences and sequences of like a generic approach versus a personalized approach. We're building the managers, we're building context-based lists for the team. So think of that as like competitive takeouts, companies are hiring for certain roles, certain personas. We're building that for them with the hot numbers, the good numbers that we have within Orum, and they're calling down that list based upon what we're giving them. And that's, if you call it $400 per week, 300 of those are manager generated off of context that's more broad. The other 100 we're using is the reps on their own are finding those other 100 contacts with mobile numbers, the hot numbers. And that's basically the very hyper personalized context of like, I saw that you looked at my profile. I saw that you attended this one school. I saw that you're a Jetson. All these different ways of person, even the intent that we have within our product. So I think in the full scheme of things, the first off with AI, it's this agent approach, which I almost can guarantee you this is going to be how people prospect in the future. Having automation run on behalf of the reps and having them call the prospects afterwards, we're crushing it with that. So that's the foundation we're doing. The second component is taking that like generic versus personalized approach with our call list. We're having a lot of success with that. Obviously using AI to build out those lists.
That's amazing. I was like so blown away by it. And Daisy, the reason why I wanted to bring this up, one, because when I was watching it break through and like talking to people beforehand with his playbook, I was like, this is such a cool thing. But what I love most about it is it represents, I think what we believe in here at Orum is like using AI to make sales actually more human centric. And when people first hear about AI agents, what they think is like, well, there goes the SDR role, there goes the AE, like they're gone. And when in reality, the way that you guys are using it, and I think it's the way that, we look at AI here as well, is like eliminating all the manual tasks with AI so that you are able to have more time having much better conversations and being able to find that better data. And like Daisy, like I said, I don't know, Daisy, if you've seen what they were doing before, but I would just love your thoughts as well on like the impact AI has in making the whole sales process actually more human centric.
Yes. I mean, AI is the present and AI is the future, in the sense that it's only going to elevate folks. Like, as we all know, being an SDR, being in sales, it's harder with time. You need to impress your prospect more. You need to do the research. You need to talk to more stakeholders before it's like a couple people to make a buy decision. Nowadays, it takes 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 people's opinion to buy something. And so because the job got so much harder, you need AI to automate so that you can keep up and expand. People are, I think, programmed to want to grow and learn. That's what I believe most people like enjoy out of life. And you can only grow and learn if some of the more like mundane day-to-day tasks is automated for you. So you can do some of the more creative, the personalizing, the thoughtful things that use your creativity. And so it's a win-win for everyone. One, it kind of matches the pace of kind of how much harder it is to prospect and book meetings and get folks engaged in sales these days. But two, it also unlocks your own personal growth, which makes you a better sales rep for yourself as well as for the prospecting clients you serve.
And if there's one more thing I do want to add, and I'm just saying this because I firmly believe this, in this whole approach of AI and like this whole agentic process, the number one channel that people are focusing on right now is like automating email. Everyone keeps talking about that, but still, phone is just it tried and true has always been the channel that has never gone away. And I'm starting to see more and more environments where if you kind of use AI, whether it's through social or through email, to take a lot of that off the team's plate and have them calling more, you will have success. So again, we double down on this. I'm just being, I firmly believe, I know we're on a podcast right now, or I'm just telling you how I believe. I do firmly believe that channel is not going away. Other channels have a far greater impact due to AI, and getting your team in a place where you can take as much off of their plate as possible and have them calling more is what's going to separate people. And just as long as teams are making sure that they're up leveling the skill on how they're making those calls and building the right lists, that's what will take advantage of that.
Listen, I totally agree. I started my career at my dad's State Farm insurance agency, making cold calls to people trying to sell life insurance, a thing that you never get a benefit from until you die. And all these years later, our most recent state of sales development report showed that like the majority of all pipeline still comes from the phone. Like I wholeheartedly agree with you there. Obviously we're big believers in it, but it's just like it cuts through the noise. And I want to ask you guys one last question. Like if there was one piece of advice around creating intent for calls beyond using 6 Sense and Orum, those two are obvious and there'll be links in the show notes to check out all that information. But like, what's one thing people can start doing today to get more context for their calls? And Ernest, I will start with you here.
Yeah, so regardless of intent, regardless of using Orum, just be very intentional with who you're calling, at least on the persona level, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, if you know your personas, you know what gets them to tick, you know what's going on in the industry, that should give you enough context to have a conversation with someone that's meaningful to present why your solution can help them. So at the very minimum, if you don't have intent, if you don't have the ability to call at scale, which Orum obviously helps you do a ton of, just build your list in the right manner with the right personas, connectivity between the types of companies that you're calling, at least have some good context as to what you should be talking about.
What do you think, Daisy? Bring us home.
I'm going to keep mine fun and simple. I think when in doubt, use the times of the month. And what I mean by that is, like I like to call Fridays beginning of day or end of day any time of the week. And it's just very easy. Like if I have no contact on the person, their role, their job, anything, I go, hey, happy Monday, rise and shine. I know hope you had a good weekend. I know it's really generic, but like it gets people going. Or happy Friday, or hey, I know it's end of day right now. You're probably ready to wrap up the day. If I could just get 7 minutes or just a little bit of time, I promise you, if you don't like what I'm saying, then we don't have to talk ever again. However you want to frame it, but I know nothing about you, your name, your company. I just know this is the beginning or end of the day or a Friday, and people have certain emotions tied to Friday, Mondays, early mornings, and end of days. So fun and light, again, it's all about just creating context out of something, even if you know nothing.
I love that. I think it's Sarah Plowman who does like her Friday cold calling videos. I think she's the one where like every time she's like, "You're gonna absolutely hate me. This is a Friday cold call," and I'm like, "What a good disarming like I'm a human being calling you thing." Ernest, Daisy, I will put links in the show notes to both of your LinkedIn's and obviously to 6 Sense and the 6 Sense and Orum playbook that we've got and all that good stuff. But seriously, I can't thank you both enough. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It was awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Ernie.